start?
I'm ready.
All right. And all our speakers are set. There, I see Miss Michelle. I see Kevin. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from the Belonging Project. If you are not familiar, the Belonging Project is a national collaborative coalition that I lead, and with my team here at Seyfarth, along with several national partners that come from legal departments, law firms, national bar associations, as well as consultant groups. Our purpose is very simple. Our purpose is to continue to make sure that diversity and inclusion is a priority during this crisis, but also to make sure that we are able to provide some support in some way to diverse law students and lawyers that we believe will be and are being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. With the memories of 2008 not too far in the back rearview mirror, we are conscious of wanting to make sure that our diverse talent gets support for the different things they may be facing, from personal development to professional development to even health and other issues. So this session today meets multiple groups. It's a session on inclusive leadership. It's also a session that will help those of us who want to be part of the solution to be allies. And it's also a conversation that we hope our law students find valuable. So I'm going to turn it over to my partner and my colleague, Lauren, who will introduce his panel and take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Cory. I'm Lauren Kaczynski, a partner in the New York City office of Seyfarth. As you can maybe see from the visuals, yes, I'm one of those. And from the non-visuals, I don't fit into any of the obvious diverse characteristics at this point. Although I do want to point out that one of my roles that I'm proudest of is that I was a co-founder and co-chair of Seyfarth's All Abilities Affinity Group. And one point about that is we are all likely to be in periods of disability at some point in our life, if not other things. I also co-lead our New York City Diversity and Inclusion Action Team. I've been trying to be an effective ally for decades, but I still have a lot to learn. And I can't think of better people to help with that learning than our terrific panelists we have today. Michelle Coleman Mays is the Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of the New York Public Library. Earlier, she was the General Counsel at Pitney Bowes and at Allstate. And each of the many times I've heard Michelle speak on the issues we'll address today, I've learned a considerable amount more. One thing that stuck out to me is her co-authorship a number of years ago of Courageous Counsel, Conversations with Women General Counsel in the Fortune 500. It left an indelible mark, and I think it describes perfectly who she is. She embodies courageousness in action at the highest levels of the profession. LaTanya Langley is the Vice President and General Counsel for Emerging Markets and Group Supply Chain at BIC. These emerging markets include Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. Prior to joining BIC, LaTanya held prominent positions at Diageo. She is an NGEM advisory board member of the Minority Corporate Counsel Association, the MCCA, which is part of our Belonging Project here. I've heard her speak on allyship and other aspects of diversity, inclusion, and belonging through the MCCA. I love this. I read in an article, if she was not an attorney, she would be a performer or choreographer because she likes to bring people together to accomplish a task that feels good, solve the mystery, prevent the tragedy, save a life, or find the romance in life's challenges. And that's a good definition for what allies should try to do as well. And by the way, LaTanya, I almost became a professional actor, so I share in that performance gene with you. Kevin Jennings, last but not least among our presenters, is the CEO of Lambda Legal, America's oldest and largest legal rights advocacy organization dedicated to achieving full legal and lived equality for LGBTQ people. It's the last day of the month, but happy Pride Month. In 1998, In 1988, while a high school history teacher, Kevin worked with his students to create the nation's first Gay Straight Alliance student club. Today, over half of American high schools have GSAs, thanks in large part to the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network that Kevin founded and led for 18 years. And then he stepped down to become President Obama's Assistant Secretary of Education for Safe and Drug-Free Schools. So with over 3 decades of experience in the field of allyship, Kevin is frequently asked to speak on this topic. So let's jump in. Michelle, what is an ally, and is ally your preferred term?
Lauren, thank you. I'm very honored to be on this afternoon. When I think of ally in the broadest sense, certainly we think about military accomplishments because the UK is an ally of the United States. So it's joining for a common purpose. But allyship has taken on a special meaning when it comes to the D&I space. And in my mind, that's when someone who is not a member of an underrepresented group, but is willing to take action to support that group or an individual within that group. And put in simple terms, I am definitely in favor of the term.
And Latanya, why are allies needed?
Thank you, and I'm also honored to be here and to be a part of this conversation. Allies are needed because if done right, it's an alignment of both publicly and privately members of targeted groups coming together to respond to needs. So it's basically breaking assumed alliances, assumed allegiances for those who have the same privileges. So it's breaking that agreement of privilege based on purely who we are born as, white, male, straight, and it improves the experiences of those who don't have access to power. So essentially it's balancing the scale by becoming an ally to those who are weighed down. So people with privilege, if they become allies, they can take on the burden of challenging the status quo. So those who are without aren't the only ones fighting this battle. So it's a strategic use of privilege to disrupt all forms of oppression. Through allyship, that's the way that you begin to close the gap from those who benefit from systemic oppression and then those who are directly oppressed by it.
Thanks, Latanya. And we'll come back to this idea of burden. And what we're going to keep emphasizing is that if you really want to be an ally, take on the vast bulk of the burden on yourself. Don't add more burden to other people by trying to become an ally. We'll get back to that. But for now, Kevin, I know that when you do these trainings, you speak of an ally continuum, and you use 4 A's, going from apathetic to aware to active to advocate as you progress along the ally continuum. Can you explain briefly what you mean by each of those stages? Kevin, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, but let me first take myself off mute, and then let me thank you and Cory for organizing this panel, and say I'm honored to share the virtual stage with Latanya and Michelle. I think that you can't divide the world into allies and non-allies, that becoming an ally really is a journey. And I think most people start at the level of being apathetic or unaware. Because building off what Latanya just said, most of us have some level of privilege. We're able-bodied, we're white, we're male, we're Christian, we're heterosexual, we're cisgender. Virtually all of us have places in our lives where we have privilege, and many of us have places in our lives where we don't have privilege. And if you have privilege, it's often invisible to you. Peggy McIntosh, who coined the term unearned privilege, talked about how it gives you invisible advantages, like you're not even aware you have them. And therefore, you tend to be apathetic. Then something happens that makes you aware. This is usually some kind of external event. It can either be something very public, like the horrific murder of George Floyd, or it can be something very private, such as a friendship or an event in your family. And you start becoming aware of your privilege and the advantages it confers. And hopefully that then prods you on to the next stage, which is you start becoming active and you start saying that this is wrong. And then you get to what I'd like to think is the final stage, which is you start becoming an advocate. You don't just start noticing that it's wrong, you start advocating. And as LaTanya said very beautifully, you start using your privilege to dismantle the system of privilege. Because no one is to blame for being born into a group that has privilege, but you have a moral choice to make. Either you benefit from that privilege, or you use the privilege to deconstruct the unfair system that privilege is a part of. You can't escape the fact that you were born into groups that have privilege, but you do have a moral choice you have to make, and that's whether or not you're going to be on the apathetic end of the spectrum or you're going to be on the advocate end of the spectrum. And I think the only true moral choice to make there is to be an advocate who uses privilege to dismantle the very system that privilege is a part of.
And Lauren, let me just add something to what LaTanya and Kevin have said. Dolly Chugg, Professor Dolly Chugg, who's at the new NYU, talks about being a believer or a builder. And I think many people like to think of themselves as believers and pat themselves on the back instead of doing the work to become a builder.
Thank you both. And our incredibly knowledgeable speakers are going to be citing to a lot of resources as we go along. A number of those are actually linked in the resource materials that we are making available as part of this program. And also you can find many others through the Belonging Project link at Seyfarth. And additionally, we have a version of a PowerPoint presentation that Kevin gave as part of the materials as well. We clearly are, the Belonging Project cares about everybody on this, in this dialogue cares about all forms of diversity. But we want to drill a little bit deeper before panning back out. You know, George Floyd was mentioned. Juneteenth just happened. There's continuing protests. Black Lives Matter is receiving very much a renewed focus. And I've heard from many Black people, their perceptions that D&I programs have disproportionate benefits and oftentimes focus in what kind of seems like an inverted pyramid, with the big wide part at the top being for white women, somewhere down below the middle being for non-Black minorities, and then at the bottom being for Black women, or at least women of color, in the very narrow bottom. LaTanya, recognizing that potential perception, and also what we hear these days, people wonder, why does responding to the assertion Black Lives Matter with some variant of, well, all lives matter, why does that create a negative reaction?
Lauren, protests and riots have broken out across America after the death of yet another unarmed Black person. You know, protesters are calling for an end to violence against Black people at the hands of unjust systems. Police and, police from some people's perspective is a part of that system. Many Black Americans have suffered from systemic oppression and racial injustice, and they simply cannot breathe. We cannot breathe. So when you see the hashtag Black Lives Matter, that is more than just a phrase or a trend on Twitter. It's a global movement to dismantle the systemic oppression of the marginalized Black community. So when someone says all lives matter, this phrase is usually used as a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement. So this phrase has created a backlash. And so while some may use it as, with good intentions, where they have this, humanistic view, humanity comes before race, gender, and sexual orientation, the phrase is simply offensive and misguided. Saying all lives matter in reaction to Black Lives Matter removes the focus from grievances that Black people are enduring. So you're essentially saying all lives have the same struggles and grievances and are in an equal amount of danger. And that's just wrong. And it invalidates the concerns of Black people, which is their lives are in immediate danger. They are more often victims of police violence. They are more often subject to racial discrimination. They have less employment opportunities, less academic opportunities, and less access to healthcare. So the concern is that their lives matter less because of the color of their skin. So Black Lives Matter is a movement for equal justice and fairness. So when you say Black Lives Matter, it's not saying that other lives don't matter. That's not what it's about. It's saying that the value of Black lives remains under assault in the United States. So 4 reasons why all lives matter is out of context and inappropriate is 1, while everyone's life matters, Black lives are too often treated as disposable, unimportant, and less valued than our white peers. The problem with all lives matter is that it operates in this myth that all racial groups are similarly situated. And then Black Lives Matter is also not targeted to challenge the worth of any other groups. It's simply an affirmation of the worth and dignity that Black lives are afforded or should be afforded. Lastly, all lives matter is a declaration of color blindness. And Michelle talks about this a lot. Color blindness ignores real group disparities. In some ways, it's like a bandage. You're covering a problem instead of addressing it. And so I never like the term, I'm colorblind. Because frankly, if you're colorblind, then that means you see no color. And you should see color. We are all we are all different. We're all individuals. We all have different colors, shapes, sizes, and forms. So to be colorblind means you're blind to color.
Michelle, did you want to add anything on that?
Did you call on me, Lauren?
Yes.
Thank
Simply to see if you wanted to add anything on that.
Yeah, well, LaTanya said it so eloquently, because I really do believe that it deflects because Black lives haven't mattered. And so if you don't acknowledge that, then you're ignoring what all of the data is telling you, everything. And so to me, it's really a subterfuge and undermining.
And just really, we are going to now start to pan back a little, but we want to emphasize that we are not deflecting in doing that, and allies do not deflect. And when people are in pain, when people are raising their issues, they do not use deflection to go to something else. But really, the same concept does apply to the all other areas of diversity when they are raising their issues. We shouldn't deflect from them as well. So, for example, Kevin, as the CEO of Lambda, have similar attempts to broaden or shift the focus from protests or other activism involving the LGBT community happen? And what is your reaction to that kind of attempted deflection as well?
First of all, we have a rule at Lambda that when somebody says something really smart, rather than try to restate it and prove how smart you are, you just say ditto. So what LaTanya just said, I say ditto. I do find that humor is a great way to get points across to people sometimes. And I've heard 2 great comedians lately explain why Black Lives Matter is critical to understand. One of them put it this way: imagine if your partner came up to you this morning, you said, "Honey, do you love me?" And your partner replied, "I love everyone." If my partner did that this morning, I'd probably slap him, because that would not be a very satisfactory response for me. Right now, Black lives are particularly devalued, and they need a particular recognition. Similarly, Michael Che, the great comedian who co-hosts Saturday Night Live Weekend Update, said, try this. Go up to a observation of 9/11 and say to people, all buildings matter. I don't think people who lost family in the World Trade Center would take that very well. So the next time you're tempted to say all lives matter, keep those 2 little comedian moments in mind and think how Black people would react to them. I do think that it is absolutely imperative that we acknowledge the unique challenges that each group faces, but also acknowledge that no group is a monolith. There are LGBTQ Black people, there are trans Black people, there are, no one group can be reduced to one experience. There are Black women, there are disabled Black people. So we can't just say there's one experience that speaks for any one group. The reason why Lambda Legal is committed to saying Black Lives Matter is we cannot achieve liberation for the LGBT community until we address racism. Because if we simply tried to address sexual orientation and gender identity alone, we would be leaving behind a huge segment of our community, because the reality is racism impacts LGBTQ people. So we need to realize that people are complex and they cannot be reduced to one facet of their identity. That does not mean that we feel that we must say Black Lives Matter, because Black people are LGBTQ people as well. So I think that it is not, as LaTanya put it, taking away from LGBTQ issues to say Black Lives Matter. It is imperative, if we care about the LGBT community, that we say Black Lives Matter, because there are LGBTQ Black people.
Thanks. And we obviously moved into the intersectionality issues here with what was just commented on. Michelle, in that area, can you speak to the perception of women of color that workplace gender initiatives often leave them behind?
So let me start by defining what I mean by intersectionality, which is overlapping systems of discrimination that affect people in complicated ways. And so an example would be if we said, well, women all experience gender bias. Everybody knows what that means. We're all on the same page. Or to say what LaTanya said, we're all aligned. Well, not quite, because women of color experience gender bias in a very different way from white women or other majority groups. And so take into account that very frequently we're the only one in the workplace in a certain setting, or one of the very few. And to be more specific, I'll give you the example that if a Black woman is acting very strongly, very passionately, she might be named the angry Black woman. And so an example of that gender bias is that we're given a very narrow beam of emotions that we can act within. And when we stray from it, we are punished. And someone who says, well, that's just, you're having a bad day. No, actually, I'm having a bad life. And people need to understand that.
Thank you for that. Michelle, staying with you, you're the legal chief and a high-level business executive for one of the world's greatest public sources of information in my hometown, the New York Public Library. Why is it important for an ally, really critical for an ally, to first seek to educate oneself? And how can an ally do so?
Well, notice what I said a minute ago, Lauren, that too often in the workplace, there are just not that many people of color or women even. So it's exhausting if you end up being the only source, as though you know it all. And we don't. As pointed out by Kevin, we're not a monolithic group. And so the idea that I'm going to turn to you for my Black voice or my female voice or my Black female voice is really shortchanging everyone. And again, putting too much burden. I don't want to carry any more weight than I already have, than I need to. And so it's very simple. You read, you access podcasts, and then you ask a person of color, do they mind letting you educate yourself by having an exchange with them? But ask. Don't assume because they are there, that's something that they want to undertake. And I think if you do that, then you start understanding that you are willing to make mistakes. And that means there are good mistakes and bad mistakes, But if you will go the distance of becoming a scholar, and that's what I'll just label it for a minute, then you'll do the work and also be willing to take the risk to have a growth mindset. Again, I'm going to quote Dolly Chuck here. If you have a growth mindset, you know you can change.
And Kevin, you started the nation's first gay-straight alliance as a high school teacher in the 1980s. First, what's the role that educators can play in cultivating motivated and effective allies? And second, what's the role that students can play in pushing schools to do so?
Well, I think what educators do is there's two things. We talked about this in curriculum development when I was in graduate school, that educators provide both mirrors and windows to students. Mirrors where young people can see themselves reflected, and windows where young people can see into the lives of others. And it's absolutely critical that we provide our students with both. Young people need to see their own experiences reflected, and they also need to have a view into the lives of people not like themselves so they can develop empathy and understanding. So as an educator, it's absolutely critical that you are constantly thinking about, are you providing both mirrors and windows to students? If you're not, you're failing. In the end, you will, Maya Angelou once said, people forget what you teach them, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And if you make a young person feel valued and make them feel like they belong, you will be shocked how much better they do in your class. So that's my advice to educators. And my advice to students is you have enormous power. Let me correct the historical record a little bit here. I was the faculty advisor. The students started the Gay Straight Alliance. It was the idea of a 15-year-old first year, 9th grade girl who had a lesbian mother. And in fact, when she stormed into my office, I was a little surprised because she wasn't my student. I primarily knew her as the hot freshman girl who had the hot senior boyfriend who was making out outside my classroom all the time, which kind of annoyed me, quite honestly. So I was confused why she was so passionate about LGBT issues. And she said, that's easy. My mother's a lesbian and I'm tired of hearing my family get put down around here. And I asked her, what do you want to call this club? And she said, I don't know. You're gay and I'm straight. Let's call it the Gay Straight Alliance. So she instinctively got the role of the ally. And I think that if you look at a lot of the great movements in American history, like I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. 15 miles away from Winston-Salem is Greensboro, North Carolina, where there were the first lunch counter sit-ins in 1962. Those were 4 teenage college students from North Carolina A&T who sat down at those lunch counters at Woolworths in downtown Greensboro in 1962. They were 18 and 19 years old. Martin Luther King was 25 years old when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. I personally think that being young is a strategic advantage to creating social change because unlike me, you don't have a mortgage. You are probably feeling more idealistic and freer to act than somebody my age who's thinking, I've got a payment to make. So I would say to young people, use your freedom to demand that things be better. And look back on history and you will see that often the people who have created change in the world have been people your age.
I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking of our 19-year-old daughter and her peers. We're at a point now where we're learning way more from her and her peers, I feel, than they're learning from us. It's really amazing, and I agree with that. And for the Belonging Project, let's remind everybody on the phone that this is not just about people who are attorneys. This is about law students as well. And we have some law students, we have some people from law school faculties on this call, I know. So thinking of that, I've heard people from oppressed communities talk about the experience of being in law school and having very difficult subjects raised, let's say not optimally, not sensitively enough. So Latanya, one example I've heard is of Black people in con law class having Dred Scott taught to them and discussed in a way that is not mindful of just, you know, how hard of a subject this should be. Can you discuss how people could maybe handle those situations constructively?
Yes, thank you. So, Lauren, I think Kevin made a great point about how educators can provide mirrors and windows. But I also think that sometimes educators can also close doors. And they can close them or shut them really hard, depending on how they teach a particular subject matter. And one of those cases that vividly stood out to me when I was in law school, and I almost forgot about it until the session came up, it was the Dred Scott case. And I will never forget sitting in my class and hearing the teacher say to me that the Supreme Court, so first they talk about how great the Supreme Court is, how powerful it is, such an honor, blah, blah, blah. But then they go on and talk about this same Supreme Court is the one that decided that slaves, and you can insert Black people into the same sentence, you know, that Black people were not included and were not intended to be included as citizens under the Constitution. And therefore, they can't claim any rights or privileges that the Constitution affords to citizens of the United States. And I'm sitting in a classroom, the only Black person, by the way, listening to, you know, now we're trying to assess the case and have discussions about the case and the, you know, the validity of the case and, you know, and this is just 163 years ago. And our Supreme Court issued one of the most racist, malicious decisions proclaiming that Blacks had no rights that white men had. And I'm expected to take a test and justify this ruling, okay? And so for me, and it's still, even talking about it now, you know, it's very, very difficult because for me, that was the first time that I actually understood why some of the systems, some of the beliefs, some of the mindsets that I was experiencing from childhood up until that very moment was rooted into our Constitution and the way that our government is run. And if you don't believe that this case still applies today, then you're missing the point. You know, that our society, our justice systems, corporate America still has this mindset that Blacks are not afforded the same privileges as our white counterparts. And so for me, I think the best way to manage these types of cases and these types of situations, because it's not just in law school, it happens, you know, when you go to work every day, you'll hear, you know, this type of mindset or see this mindset, to remember that without allyship, how can you eradicate this type of mindset? Right? So it's a continued fight to change that mindset. And it is deeply rooted in our systems. So for me, that's the one case that really stood out to me. And to this day, I feel I'm still a bit traumatized as to how, you know, especially being the only Black student in my law school class that was discussing that issue, everyone looked at me, you know, to give an opinion about this case. Like I was supposed to be, you know, the knowledge bearer on this particular issue, and it's too much pressure, too much stress.
I mean, we're on this call, we are all attorneys or law students. And when people talk about what is systemic racism, what is systemic biases, if anybody should be able to understand it, it's us. Because the law is nothing but what society proclaims it to be. And really the structures for what's systemic is in the law. Now, but to not leave it with just such a potentially of a downer of an attitude, there are certainly, I mean, there are great law school experiences that can happen. My most impactful law school class, third year, A. Leon Higginbotham Jr., the chief judge of the Third Circuit at that time, who'd written books on it, did a class that was specifically about you know, the systemic racism and the treatment of blacks in the United States for almost 400 years at that point, now over 400 years. And it was profound. And so for those of you still in law school, you can find those experiences, and to take what, you know, Kevin said, you can even urge them on. Do any of the other speakers want to talk on that? Yes.
Lauren, I'm sorry, and I didn't want to leave it on such a angry note, but that case makes me angry. I did have, you know, one professor who really stood out to me in law school, and this guy, he was weird. You know, he had a big beard. He always wore shorts to class, even in the winter. And you know, he didn't have an office. The school wouldn't give him an office because he was that weird. You had to meet with him in the library. But I will tell you, that man was so impactful because he got it. You know, he understood issues of social injustice. And if you look at him, you could tell that he was very much against any systems or structures. I mean, that's who he was at the core. But the issues that he talked about in law school and allowed us to express and allowed us to have a dialogue about is one of my greatest memories. And it was on issues of race and feminism and, you know, the topics that, you know, you would typically think are off limits. I mean, he just allowed us to express ourselves, and it really was a strong discourse, and I think it brought the students together. So I just wanted to sort of balance that point of view a little bit.
Education is not just about issues, it's also about individuals and all their many faceted uniqueness. One mantra that we use in Seyfarth's All Abilities Affinity Group, which I learned from disability rights organizations, is focus on the individual's abilities. I think that mantra can apply to far more than just people with disabilities. It can focus on everyone. And that gets to the heart of, you know, get to know and respect each person's passions, goals, and accomplishments within our profession. So, LaTanya, staying with you for a moment, what's the importance of an ally seeking to get to know and respect the authentic selves of those to whom the ally is seeking to be an ally?
So I think that it's really important that people understand that allyship is a process. You have to build relationships based on trust, consistency, accountability with marginalized individuals. You really have to show genuine interest and engagement in order to create the allyship. I've had a number of people come up to me that say they want to ally with me or they want to support me in the struggle. And frankly, I didn't want them to be my ally. You know, to be an ally is to make a special effort to respect differences and to connect organically, not just because you feel guilt, right? It's because you feel an obligation. And so it needs to be authentic. And so one interview I saw recently, and I think it was a media interview, and one of the students said, he worked for a media company, and he said, I speak 2 languages. I speak English and I speak white. And that just stood out to me because he felt like those were 2 different languages, and that he couldn't go into the room as his authentic self with his colleagues and those who wanted to be his allies because he needed to speak their language in order to be accepted. So for me, the allyship allows authentic dialogue where there's one universal language of change.
And we will repeat this a number of times. One thing that struck me when you were speaking, LaTanya, is if you really want to be an ally, don't make it about you. It's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about those who you seek to be an ally to. And if you're doing that, you won't, and we'll come back to this issue of boundaries and authenticness, but you won't push something that's not authentic. You won't push over people's boundaries if you're acting empathetic and making it about them, not about you. Kevin, we're talking about the importance of kind of understanding identity as part of the education process. Within your wheelhouse at Lambda is gender identity and other aspects of identity that are sometimes not evident to others, sometimes can be fluid. Can you briefly explain the importance of this idea of really truly getting to understand each individual as themselves if you're going to try to advocate on their behalf?
Yeah, I think being a good ally starts with basically being a good listener. And understanding that the real goal here is to understand the humanity of the person you're trying to be an ally to. And I would say one of the things that you never want to do as an ally is speak for someone. You might want to speak up for someone, but you don't want to speak for them. They are the expert on their experience. And you want to respect their expertise and learn from their expertise. And don't ever, 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 as an ally, say to someone, well, you misunderstood. That's not what they meant. Maybe actually shut up. You don't know. And this goes back to the former teacher in me. I was listening to LaTanya's story, and it was so painful because if you are not from a group whose very humanity has been questioned, you have no idea what it feels like to sit in a classroom and see whether or not your validity as a human being is up for debate feels. For me as a white man, this is an academic exercise. For a Black person, this is an assault on their very validity as a human being. And any teacher who doesn't take that into account in planning how they conduct their class is, in my opinion, guilty of educational malpractice. So I think that it's really critical to acknowledge also one more thing about this, which is that, there are certain attorneys and certain law professors who would throw large books at me when I say this. Let's get over the idea that the law is neutral or that teachers should be neutral. It's not. When the Constitution declared that Black people were 3/5 of a human being, the neutrality of the document went out the window. And I think one of the most damaging things to people who have been denied their humanity by the law is when we hide behind this fiction that it's neutral, or teachers or professors try to pretend they are neutral. The fact of the matter is, as Elie Wiesel once put it, neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. So let's get over this myth of neutrality, and let's acknowledge that, like everything else in our society, laws, professors, institutions have biases. They need to be brought to light. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be addressed. And let's quit pretending that things are neutral, because they never, ever, 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 ever are.
You mentioned the importance of listening. Listening and watching is a start, but doing so while constantly applying the filter of one's own perceptions, which is what our minds typically will do, doesn't get one very far. Michelle, how can someone learn to listen and watch with a striving and openness to truly understand as much as possible the perspective of others who are different?
It's interesting when I listen to Kevin and LaTanya, it takes work. People sometimes are intellectually lazy. If it comes naturally, if I don't have to invest too much time, if I don't have to take away from my leisure time, fine, I'll get it. But if you tell them that they need to learn, and that's why I go back to this growth mindset, it says, I am not where I want to be, but I'm going to learn how I can be better. And that means you have to invest. So I've got an acronym I use, and it's somewhat corny, but it works for me. And I talk about you need to check your baggage. And that's my metaphor for bias. It just oozes through every part of our body. It means we're still alive if we've got biases. So that's the good thing. But it also means it's doing the lion's share of your thinking. And I equate it to having a driverless mind. It may be okay to have a driverless car. It is not always okay to have a driverless mind. So I said, when I tell you to check your baggage, I say, take Sal with you on the journey. And that stands for slow down, ask questions, and listen. And when I talk about asking questions, I don't mean the rhetorical ones. I mean the ones that invite someone to tell you what they're really thinking, what they've really experienced, what they want you to know. And active listening means just that. There's a quote that I have been using for decades. It says, most of us pretend to be listening when what we're really doing is rearranging our prejudices. And that is what we do most often. So if you can actively listen, and one of the best ways I know to do that, and I particularly do it when I'm engaged in a conversation with someone, let's say, that wouldn't be a person I would take to dinner, I repeat what they have told me to see if I've actually heard what they've said. And I do that for a number of reasons, but the critical one is I want them to know I've invested my mental capacity to hear them. And so if you do that, go back to something that I said earlier, you've got to be willing to make mistakes. And that means that we as the underrepresented or the out group may have to give you a little leeway and some slack, but not that much slack.
We will definitely come back to that concept, but sticking you with Michelle for right now, because something when we were preparing that you mentioned, and it goes to another aspect of education, the role of allies in educating and advocating to others with privilege. I mean, that's a fundamental part of what an ally does if they're being effective. And you talked about even the particular importance of that happening in rooms and settings where it's only people of privilege. But can you talk about why and how allies should seek to educate and advocate to others with privilege?
That's so obvious to me because they're considered them. They're part of the in-group. And so they are far less threatening and probably far more credible because they won't be seen as having an agenda, that they simply are having a conversation versus a debate. And so to me, if you are doing that, you've gone from being a bystander, that is, you're listening to your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner, because that's the one where it typically comes up. And so, the crazy uncle that had too much to drink, so therefore you forgive him. And instead, there's an opportunity, even if you can't change the uncle, to change the people that are sitting around the uncle. And if you miss that opportunity, I think it is squandered. And so to me, you've got a platform that as an other group, outside other person, you have an opportunity to educate in a way that you may have a more receptive audience than I ever would.
And Kevin, in your training materials that we've attached, the PowerPoints, you note that in terms of the importance of people with privilege educating others with privilege, you said that it's particularly important, quote, because to people with privilege, equality can feel like oppression, close quotes. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Sure. I'm going to use a very specific example. I'm Christian, and my father was a minister. And I'm going to use an example that drives me personally out of my mind, and that is the war on Christmas. Now, for centuries, people of my religious faith have been privileged in America. And when our holiday comes around, first of all, we get it off. Everybody gets our holiday off. Other religious groups in America have to take paid vacation time to get their holidays off. But everybody gets my holiday off. And with impunity, people of my religious background run around saying, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, as if everybody celebrates my holiday. Now, recently, other folks have been saying, why don't we say happy holidays instead, to acknowledge that other folks are celebrating holidays as well, because we're not the only ones celebrating a holiday about now. You would think from the reactions of some Christians in this country that they are being oppressed. They're not. No one is saying your holiday doesn't matter anymore. You can't celebrate your holiday. Your holiday has less value. We're simply saying, let's treat everyone equally and acknowledge that everybody has holidays and everybody celebrates different holidays based on their religious faith. And everybody should have a happy holiday, not just the Christians. But boy, do a lot of Christians get pissed off when they're told they should say happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas, that they should treat other holidays with the same level of respect that their holiday gets treated with. That's what I mean by equality can feel like oppression. And often, people who have had privilege their whole life, when suddenly they are treated like everybody else, feel like they're being oppressed. And we need to do two things. First of all, help them understand that it's not oppression, it's equality. And number two, building off what Michelle said, I think often the person who is best equipped to carry that message is someone who shares that privilege. If I speak up, I can drop the little bomb of like, hey, my father's a minister. Nobody's telling me I can't celebrate Christmas. What's your problem? If a heterosexual person speaks up about heterosexual privilege, nobody goes, well, there they go, promoting homosexuality again. If I speak up on racism, nobody's going to say, oh, he's one of those angry white people. You know, it just doesn't happen. So this goes back to what I said much earlier in the hour, when I said, I have certain privileges because I'm white and I'm male and I'm Christian and I'm able-bodied. I can use those privileges to help dismantle privilege, or I can benefit from them unfairly. It's a binary choice.
Michelle, you had talked before about mistakes, and in fact that if an ally is really trying hard and putting themselves out there, mistakes are pretty much going to be inevitable. But you talked about good mistakes and bad mistakes. What are constructive ways that both the faltering ally and those the ally was trying to support can react to potential mistakes and misunderstandings?
We heard earlier that these, I don't call them difficult conversations, Lauren, I call them worthwhile conversations. Because when you say difficult, it already conjures up, I'm going to be doing something I'm not going to like, and I'm going to do something that I'm going to run into opposition. Whereas when I hear something is worthwhile, it says to me, it means it's worth doing. And in that same vein, it takes time to build trust. You can't go into a room having just met someone probably and say, you should trust me, because I'm telling you, you should trust me. And now I want to ask you, why are you racist? That would not go over very well. And so while trust takes time to build, there are some concrete steps that can be taken, such as even opening a dialogue with the understanding that it means that you're willing to be uncomfortable. Most people don't like to do things they're uncomfortable doing, even giving constructive feedback. You'd think somebody was going into a war. They've got to think about it. They've got to ask 10 people, whereas invest the time, invest the time. And so if I go up to someone that I don't know, I'm not likely to ask immediately, although I have on occasion, exactly what are their views on race. But I might start off saying, I hear that you're interested in XYZ, or tell me about yourself. I have never seen a person that was not willing to tell you about themselves. And when you find the common ground, and there's usually common ground somewhere, you can start building on it. Now go back to what the practical import of this is. There is no way to have these conversations without stepping on, as I call it, a landmine in my head. But it means that we've got to be able to have a dialogue that says, let me tell you how I felt about that. And so if you said to me, as if we were talking, and if you replied to me, oh, I'm sorry I offended you, that makes it my problem. Versus, can you tell me why that is something that I should have approached differently? Meaning, I'm signaling to you that I want to learn, that I know I did something that you didn't like. So you've got to give people the bandwidth to make mistakes, and that includes us that are not in the majority. But at the same time, the person who's on the other side has got to signal to you, I'm willing to be taught, and I use that word advisedly because I'm trying to learn. I know I don't know everything. So that, there is no easy way to do this. You have got to put in the time. And one of the best things I can tell people to do, and it was said an hour ago, find out who you're talking to. Who is the individual? Not who is, oh, you're a Black person, therefore you will tell me about Blackness. Who are you?
And Latanya, for the next question for you, I actually hadn't thought of this connection, but when I was thinking of asking you this question, I was actually deriving it from watching in the performance space right now, and in your former life as imagine as a performer and choreographer, but there is a bunch of canceling going on in Broadway, in opera, in movies. That there's a cancel culture that it has arisen in the performing arts space right now. What is your take on this developing and seemingly already pronounced cancel culture being promoted, often on social media and fairly often anonymously, as a means of combating oppression?
Well, Lauren, the Court of Social Justice has no appeals. And this cancer culture is really shaming people into submission. I mean, it's a total cultural revolution, right? Yes, it's dangerous. There's a whole school of thought that talks about why canceling or this cancel culture is so dangerous. And, I get it. But I think it's important to understand how we got here. Cancel culture is driven by righting wrongs and putting a stop to anyone who is deemed to do something that's socially unacceptable, right? So it's a culture, it's a revolution, but it's righting wrongs, right? The reason we have a cancel culture is because society has failed the oppressed at every step, in every turn. And so that inaction is why there's so many people that are so engaged and involved in this cancel culture and why it exists and why it remains. So, until we dismantle this system that doesn't appear to care for people who are oppressed, you're always going to have a really strong cancel culture. And once these inequalities and injustices are addressed, there will be no need for cancel culture. But until then, frankly, I'm keeping track of all the Karens that are being exposed. I'm keeping track, of all these corporations, that are putting out these sayings and not actually doing anything, and employees actually speaking up and exposing some of this bad behavior and simply changing the landscape for those who are being exposed. Now, the one downfall about this is, there's no learning by the person that is canceled, right? It's just damage, right? They're damaged. And there's no opportunity for that dialogue, no opportunity for that growth and that learning. And, it's too late, at least for the person that's canceled, right? So I do wish that there was a means to resolve that portion of it. But again, right now, the cancel culture is a necessary evil. That's my views.
So I hear you loud and clear, and I even think about Me Too movement. A Black woman starts the movement, but it doesn't get much attention. And then it only gets attention many years later through a social media campaign. And, you know, Harvey Weinstein, for example, could have been in there for a while. But even the EEOC, I'm an employment lawyer and I represent employers. Even the EEOC came out against, because we saw a trend of just fire him. There's one allegation, just fire him. And one thing about this, going back to what Michelle was talking about mistakes, you know, there are mistakes and there are mistakes, and there is evidence and there is evidence. You know, these concrete proof audio and videos are really damning evidence, but some of this cancel culture is coming up anonymously and without seeming support. And I guess part of the question would be is some people, I think, wanting to be allies are a little bit afraid, and some degree of being afraid is appropriate, because bad mistakes are bad mistakes, and continuing to be excused for inappropriate behavior is not justifiable. But how, and I'll leave this open to any of the speakers, how do you want to respond to like this? Because we're at a hinge point moment. How for people who want to be allies should they look at you know, at the current environment and take it as guidance for how they should act?
You know, I'm going to quote again from Dolly Chugg, and it's being in a way that you have willful awareness. You know, that again, I keep going back to, it takes work, but it is willful awareness versus the driverless mind that I talked about. And if someone is willing to do that, then I'm going to cut you some slack. Because if, for example, you've taken the time to read Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, or you've taken the time to read James Baldwin in Native Son, that is a way to bridge our differences in a way that appears less threatening, because you're talking about an intellectual exercise that we can bring down to reality. You know, I can bring it home to you. You can talk about what he wrote 30-something years ago, but let me tell you what happened to me 30 minutes ago. And so I'm willing to do that if someone has willful awareness.
We've been talking about the do's for being an ally, and one of those do's is avoiding potential landmines, to use Michelle's phrase. But that phrase even then pivots to the don'ts. And so, Michelle, what are the typical landmines, pitfalls that good allies should strive to avoid?
And they've come up today in various forms as we've been talking, Lauren, but let me just identify the 4 that I think really warrant people paying attention to. Going in like you're a savior, you know, riding in on your horse or on your big pen, no pun intended, Latanya, saying, I got the answer. And so that to me means you're on a rescue mission. I don't need to be rescued. The other one is feeling sympathy for you. I'm so sorry. I saw a sign in the subway and I loved it. It says, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. And so I think people need to avoid that one as well, because it's more about you rather than about learning what it is that has triggered the incident in the first place. Latanya mentioned this one, tolerance, saying that you're colorblind. And as I say, no, you're blinded by color. And so the idea that you don't see my color means you deny me. And the 4th one is tokenism. You know, you're willing to have a 1, but not too many. You know, one that I've got my quota here, or typecasting. You know, that all Asians are good in math. They certainly can't play basketball unless they saw Yao Ming. So to me, all of that can lead to really squandering an opportunity to really have willful awareness.
And I would add to that, those are really excellent points, Michelle. Don't assume you know the best solution to other people's struggles. I've seen, you know, a number of programs being launched, and, you know, even these advertisements that go out, and not one person from, you know, the community was even consulted, you know, but yet these companies want to speak for our Black team members, right? don't act like, you're entitled to other people's emotional or educational labor. So in other words, be open to thoughtful questions and don't act like, people owe you an answer. And then the last one is, I hate when people lead with, this is only good intentions. I'm sorry I messed up. It came from a good place. Instead, just focus on impact. Focus on how what you said could have harmed someone else without explaining that you didn't mean to hurt them, right? Just own it. So a couple more don'ts.
Yeah, I don't want to know about your attitude. I want to know about your behavior.
Yeah.
It's how we act that matters. Kevin, other don'ts that you'd want to add?
Two quick things I would add. First of all, I learned a great term about 2 weeks ago, performative allyship. And this is when you perform your allyship for everyone to see, so that everyone sees what a great ally you are. Maybe you all know now my dad's minister. And so I often revert to Bible verses. I apologize. But in the Bible, there's a verse where it's like, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing when you do good works. If you have to talk to everybody about all the good works you're doing as an ally, this is really about you and not about actually doing good work. So avoid acts of performative allyship, which are primarily designed to show off what a good ally you are. Mm-hmm. And the second thing I would say is, this is a process, and there was a hilarious article in The Onion about 3 weeks ago where the headline was, "White person exhausted after 4 days of fighting racism." This isn't going to be over anytime soon. And there was an article a few years ago, the cover of New York Magazine. I don't even remember the specific circumstances, but Alec Baldwin had done something. He'd screwed up in some way. And he wrote a cover article for New York Magazine entitled, "I Give Up." And this article enraged me because I thought, of course you give up, because you have privilege. Privileged people can walk away. They can give up. People without privilege don't get to give up. They have to keep fighting forever. So if you're really serious, stick around. Because the reality is, the ultimate privilege is to say, well, I've done my part now, and now I'm going to go back to binge watching America's Got Talent. Because people without privilege don't get to do that.
You know what, Kevin, what it reminds me of is Fannie Lou Hamer when she said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired."
Yep.
We're gonna turn carefully to the worthwhile, not difficult, worthwhile discussion of the role the role of those allies seek to benefit, those who feel oppression, the role that they might be able to play in terms of leveraging allyship. But we want to start with burdens and boundaries, which, LaTanya, you've already touched on somewhat. But should the people allies are seeking to benefit be burdened with the extra effort of helping the allies? And to the extent they are willing to do so, with willing being key here, are there boundaries that can protect them from being drained too much?
One of my dear friends and a partner of Inclusion Strategy Solutions, her name is Paula Edgar. She wrote an article recently that stated that, Black employees are experiencing trauma on multiple levels. And they just want to be acknowledged, supported, and valued. That's it. And so allies need to, as Michelle mentioned before, take responsibility for their own education. And never assume that undertaking is a Black or brown person's responsibility or an LGBTQ responsibility. That's up to you to get your own education. Again, unless a person of color offers, don't take the onus of explaining racism and its impact and how you can solve those burdens, right? So people of color, particularly Black Americans, they're utterly exhausted by centuries of work to make people understand what they feel, right? And it's becoming quite uncomfortable. And so I think that burden should not be on the oppressed.
Michelle, in taking LaTanya's point that the best way of knowing that the person actually is willing to and wants to is them actually saying it, them being the one to volunteer it. But assuming somebody who is diverse, who is part of a group that's been oppressed, is willing and expresses a willingness to help, how can the people that the allies are seeking to benefit, how can the people seeking to be benefited leverage and engage in driving those efforts? What can somebody from a diverse group do if they want to drive and really make the allyship efforts even more successful?
Yeah, and that's a tough one for me. When I saw it, I went, oh, I hope Lauren doesn't ask me this question. But since you did, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is inviting people into the circle, because they wouldn't necessarily invite, maybe they want to invite themselves. But for example, you've got a group that might be principally for affinity for Black folks. It would be very interesting to have a white person involved with that group, not just one necessarily either, and encouraging them to invite others. Because one of the ways in which you can experience what they are talking about is to go in and act like a sponge. So not being exclusionary, but more inclusionary yourselves. And so I think having the ability to do that would be profound. The other thing that I think is not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but something you can certainly talk about within your workplace, is inviting people to have a platform where this is endorsed. And when LaTanya mentioned the ads, I thought if I saw one more ad with sad music, I was going to barf. So, okay, I got that off my chest. So I want the institutions to prove, because if the proof is in the pudding, is that giving people that have been underrepresented a platform and not being resentful of it. It's okay that as long as you're happy and you thank me 1,000 times, then I'll be your ally. But when you're now saying, well, give me part of that platform, and willingly, being willing to ask for it. I want part of your platform. Okay, you can have part of my platform. That to me says if there is real investment, that you're going to do something that is visible, that is valuable, and that helps me.
Thanks. At this point, I'd like to read our virtual CLE code. It's SS as in Seyfarth Shaw 0995. That's SS 0995. And Cory, the last two areas that we had sketched out to cover right now are client expectations around allyship and examples of effective and impactful allyship. But I'm also mindful that we're 15 minutes from our scheduled end time. Do you want to jump in with any questions or comments now?
Sure. There's one question, and then there's a second question for me. So I'll start with I'll start with the first question. Earlier, LaTanya, you talked very eloquently about Black Lives Matter, and you explained why we say Black Lives Matter and what most people mean when they say Black Lives Matter. But there is actually an organization named Black Lives Matter, and for many people, it is seen as political, right? For example, in the Christian space, let me be specific, in the white evangelical Christian space, there has been some criticism of some of their political tenets. In other spaces, there are people who view the group itself negatively, and so they associate even just the statement of Black Lives Matter. They associate those connections very differently from how you explained it. And so the question is, can you provide more context around that? And, you know, for people who position it as more a political agenda versus a social justice agenda, how would you respond to that? And I welcome all of the panelists to answer this question. And I'm going to go on mute.
Thanks. So, well, since I took up a lot of time on that particular topic, I would love for anyone else to jump in there. But essentially, it's, you know, there is that other point of view, which is why it's important to ask people what they mean, right, when they're using that particular phrase, and not assume negative intent. That's where you begin, right? But again, this is about valuing Black lives, which are what's currently under assault in the US. And so whenever you take that out of context, it's going to cause conflict. So it's very, very important to make sure that you have it in context of especially how it's being used now, especially by our millennials and our fearless younger generations. When they say Black Lives Matter today, that's an equal justice and fairness movement. So I turn it over to anyone else if they want to address that one.
I'm just going to say ditto.
Ditto.
Okay, so I have a question, and this is where, you know, I started my career as an employment lawyer, labor and employment, became a product liability lawyer and torts lawyer with very little employment, and then diversity and inclusion. And my experience, and of course I work at Seyfarth Shaw now, which has a large labor and employment department, but my experience is employment lawyers can be the most conservative and ultra careful when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And so there was something that came to me when we were talking about this cancel culture. One of the things that we've been talking about, even as a firm, and we talked about this at our first town hall, is that as lawyers, we are trained to think very differently about cause and effect and even discrimination. A lot of the things that we end up litigating have a lot to do with intent. Whereas when we're talking about systemic issues, right, often intent isn't even part of the game. And so, like Lauren pointed out, we have situations where an organization is taking a position to fire someone because it doesn't jive with their values. That may or may not be a legal issue, but it certainly can be a diversity issue. And as organizations, we often have to face that, right? Because if someone writes an op-ed somewhere and they have the right to do it, or a video surfaces of Amy Cooper and her organization now has to make a decision about what they're going to do or not, it may or may not be approached, like Lauren said, from an employment perspective, right? Like, do we have the elements to meet XYZ so we're not sued? And so the question is for organizations and for people like me, where sometimes we have to navigate the difference between, no, these are our inclusion values or our diversity values versus this is a legal issue. Do you have any tips, suggestions? Michelle, your client, Latanya, your client, you both work at corporations or businesses. What is your response to that? And I'm going to go on mute. And Kevin, you too.
So I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding precisely what you think the dilemma is, Cory. Are you saying that it isn't necessarily a legal issue that someone has found themselves in the crosshairs, and yet it conflicts with the D&I objective?
Yes, because I think sometimes we get overly careful, right? From the D&I perspective, we may say, this is a values issue. We need to separate from this person. But others may say, oh, wait a minute. They legally haven't done something that constitutes discrimination, because people can do things that are not in alignment with your values, but still not necessarily be something that gives a legal basis for liability. And sometimes in my world, I see the two being conflated.
No, I understand you. And go back to something I think has to be a North Star, which is your values ought to embrace D&I. You know, they really shouldn't have to be a false choice that, you know, I believe in D&I, but this is a value. So wait a minute, why isn't your D&I, you know, conflating? I'm going to bring them together because to me, it's so much easier to see it as one continuum, because at the end of the day, if you have an organization that allows values to be trampled on, I think it inevitably leads to less inclusion. And that is the way I approach it. So I've had many people say to me, well, this doesn't amount to discrimination or harassment or whatever bucket you want to put it in. But if you look at a leader who, let's say, is abusive, let's give that as an example. There is no category for abuse under Title VII. And yet for me, that is the very thing that most people of color want to talk about, is I have been abused. And so I think you have to be able to look at them without going cross-eyed and say they have to support one another. I don't know if that answers your question, but that is how I approach it.
And also to add to that, I mean, you mentioned like the Amy Coopers of the world. I'll say Karens, just to cover off all of them and not just focus on Amy. You know, this mentality, this white privilege mentality. Okay, there's no crime. You know, you're not breaking a law by behaving the way she behaved necessarily. You can argue, but are these the kind of people that you want in your executive ranks or in your boardroom that has the power to hire, fire, promote? I mean, that's the value that you also have to look at in terms of inclusion. Is these are decision makers, and these are people that are impacting the careers of those who are you know, not privileged. And do you want to have those people making decisions for the company? I mean, you have to start looking at more than just whether it's a law issue when you're removing people from the ranks for having poor values, frankly.
Yeah, and you know what, the way, LaTanya, I see it as culture. As people will frequently say, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes.
And so if your culture is toxic, you can rest assured that the Black and brown people will know it immediately.
Yeah, I want to go back to what
LaTanya, the canary in the mine.
To go back to what LaTanya just said, to me, this is just a performance issue. As Michelle was saying, D&I should be a performance metric. Are you creating an environment where all employees can thrive and do their best work? And if you are not, you should be put on warning. And if you fail to improve, you should be dismissed. What? It's simple. It's really simple. And if you don't make it a performance metric, you're not serious about it.
Exactly.
Because what gets measured is what gets done. You know, it's as simple as that. It should be a performance metric like everything else people are evaluated on. And if people are consistently failing, you should treat them just like when they consistently fail on any other central performance metric.
And you know what I think people do, Kevin? They too often want to talk about what people accomplish and not how they accomplish it. And that is a critical error.
Yeah. I think particularly in firms where it's like, well, you know, he billed 1,900 hours last year. And it's like, yeah, and who did he break in the process?
Right. I always ask, how many dead bodies are there on the road?
Yeah.
Off of
One
that,
more question.
Oh, good. Cory, did you have one more to ask?
Yeah, one more.
Oh,
Michelle's
sure.
laughing at me. You were selected to moderate this because of all that you do as an ally. and you've asked all the questions today, and you haven't answered any. Michelle, Kevin, LaTanya, do you have a question for Lauren? Otherwise, I do. Do you have a question for Lauren?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So how many other white males have you recruited to your cause?
I'd love to say tens of thousands, but hundreds.
That's not
And
shabby.
I still need to do more.
Okay, and what's your biggest selling point how long does it take you to recruit someone, and how do you know they've gotten?
Well, this goes back to, it's about the individual, right? And you got to meet each individual where they are. And going back to LaTanya and I having dreams of being a performer, my core values stay the same, but I'm a chameleon. I try to meet people where they are. I try to mirror them. So I find whatever way in I can, and go from there. But then sometimes and we teach this, even as off of what Cory said earlier, I started getting involved in, they were just then diversity initiatives. Then we added the I, now we've got the belonging, and they've evolved. And I used to think that my employment law hat was completely separate from my D&I hat. They're merging off of what all of you just said. They are merging in some ways. And we have to be careful about that in some ways. I had colleagues before that say, if implicit bias comes up, you want to emphasize that just because somebody might have those doesn't mean they act in a discriminatory way. And they're right. It's going back to what you said, Michelle, it's action that matters. But I think the one thing we teach is bias interruption. And so, but the times when I convert an ally that I'm most proud of is where I actually think I managed to interrupt what I see as a bias, but then do it in a constructive way where they don't get ultra defensive, and I actually pivot them. That's the hardest kind to do, but that's, I think, the most meaningful.
So I wanted to get in a plug before we ran out, because this organization really stands for tangible commitments to these efforts. And so, in line with that, I want to make sure that people are aware of the Black Lawyers Matter program, because I know we have some law students on this call. And so the MBA commercial law section has taken immediate steps to impact diversity in the profession by launching an internship program for law students, where we are putting in the seed money to ensure that these law students are employed this summer. What we're concerned about is that the law students of color are disproportionately impacted by having limited access to decreasing job opportunities, especially during COVID-19. And so we are providing the opportunities with law firms and corporations, and we're providing the seed money. So if anyone is interested in that program, whether it be by a sponsorship or even providing an assignment, we're giving the seed money. We just need the commitment. So, reach out to me on that, because I think that's in line with tangible efforts that we're looking for.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Michelle, we have a question where somebody wanted you to repeat the names of 2 books that you mentioned.
So the one book was The Person You Mean to Be.
That's a very good one.
Yep, by Dolly Chugh, Chugh. She's a professor at NYU. And I don't remember the second book that I referenced. I will put a plug in for something since you're talking about.
I think it was Coates.
Oh, Ta-Nehisi Coates?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one? Between the World and Me?
Between the World and Me.
Okay.
That was the other one. And I just want to put a plug in for 2 studies. One is already up on the Commission on Women in the Profession for the ABA, which is Bias Interrupters. That study has been out 2 years, and it has very concrete things you can do to interrupt bias. It's not about platitudes and chants and handshakes, which we can't do anymore. So I would encourage you to go to the website. The second research study that is coming out in about 60 days, it's called This Talk Isn't Cheap, and it's about the tension between white women and women of color and how to find common ground. So that'll be out hopefully by the end of the summer. Both of those are going to be on the Commission on Women's website. And again, they're concrete things you can do, not just talk, even though it is called This Talk Isn't Cheap.
Resources, Lauren mentioned this earlier, but I'll repeat it before we end. Seyfarth Shaw, as part of our efforts internally, we created an anti-racism toolkit and an allyship toolkit. You can access it at Seyfarth, doggone it, Seyfarth.com/ally toolkit. And you can, there are articles, podcasts, books, all kinds of resources there that you can leverage. Lauren, we've got another webinar coming up on the 15th and one on the 17th, so stay plugged in. I turn it over to you, and I'm going to go on mute if that's okay.
I think we're a minute over, and I think I just want to thank profusely our unbelievably amazing speakers for agreeing to share their wisdom with us today. Thanks so much, and thanks for everybody for participating.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.